Listen carefully, because what I'm about to explain might sound like a tactic, a trick, even a form of manipulation at first glance, but it's not. It's something far deeper, something that rewires the emotional circuitry of your relationship. When a man finally steps back from his wife, when he stops chasing, over-explaining, and constantly appeasing, he isn't playing games. He's recalibrating a dynamic that's been quietly draining the life out of both of them for years. And most men never get to see what really happens next, because they panic long before the real transformation begins. There's a biological reason women react so intensely to emotional distance. Human connection, especially romantic attachment, triggers ancient chemical loops of security and reward. When that loop is disrupted, a predictable chain reaction begins. A man who used to be endlessly available suddenly isn't, and it sends her mind into chaos. She doesn't interpret that absence rationally. Her brain, conditioned to equate attention with safety, begins to fight the change. And this is exactly where most men crumble. They mistake this resistance for rejection and rush back into servitude. You want to know when she starts to actually feel your absence? It's not within hours, not even days. It usually takes weeks, sometimes longer. And the process always unfolds in 5 distinct emotional phases. Each one is like a stress test, designed, consciously or not, to see whether you truly stand firm in your new frame. But before we even reach those stages, you need to understand why this works, what it awakens in her psychology, and why almost every man who tries it fails miserably. The first phase is simple but brutal: anger. And it's here that nearly every man collapses. She notices you pulling back. Less texting, less enthusiasm, less automatic compliance. And her immediate instinct isn't to miss you, it's to challenge you. "How dare he?" becomes the silent mantra behind every eye roll, every sarcastic tone, every passive-aggressive gesture. If your relationship still has a foundation of calm and mutual respect, this anger brews quietly inside her. But if you've already been walking on eggshells, expect explosions, accusations, threats of divorce, dramatic posts about self-worth. She might pack a bag, call her mother, or start hinting that she needs space. And that's where most men panic. They mistake emotional volatility for imminent loss. Within 48 hours, they fold, sending long texts, begging to talk, rushing to restore peace. But what they don't realize is that this very storm is necessary. Her anger is not a sign that you've ruined things. It's the first spark of recalibration. The emotional system is protesting the loss of control, and if you can stay composed through this phase, everything that follows changes. The moment you chase during her anger, you confirm her suspicion that your love is conditional on her approval, that a little pressure will make you retreat from your own boundaries. Women might not consciously think he's weak, but something inside them shifts. Respect begins to evaporate, and attraction follows right behind it. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." In relationships, this means that if you don't see how these emotional tests operate beneath the surface, you'll keep failing them without even realizing why. But when you stay calm through her anger, when you hold your ground without hostility, something subtle begins to happen. She starts questioning herself rather than you. Did I push too far? Have I taken him for granted? Why does this feel different? The emotional polarity flips, and self-reflection replaces blame. This is the invisible power of distance. It allows the emotional fog to clear. See, endless availability breeds emotional suffocation. Men often believe that love means constant reassurance, constant communication, constant access. But what that creates isn't closeness, it's fatigue. The truth no one wants to admit is that proximity without polarity kills desire. When there's no space, there's nothing to miss. When there's no challenge, there's nothing to chase. Imagine being given your favorite meal 3 times a day. At first, it's comforting. Then, it becomes routine. Eventually, it's revolting. The same principle applies to emotional presence. Without space, appreciation dies. Without mystery, love turns into obligation. But here's where it gets tricky, and where most men fail before they even begin. Not all women respond to distance the same way. Some see it as a wake-up call. Others interpret it as abandonment. Understanding which type you're dealing with can mean the difference between rekindling her respect and lighting the fuse that ends it all. Because in the next phase, as anger fades and space begins to take root, you'll see two very different reactions emerge. And knowing which one you're facing will determine whether this entire process rebuilds your connection or burns it to the ground. Now, this is where things get interesting and dangerous. Once the initial anger cools, distance doesn't just reveal her feelings, it reveals her nature. Because there are, at the core, two archetypes of women when it comes to relationships. One views love as stability, loyalty, and shared purpose. The other views love as stimulation, attention, and validation. And how she responds to your distance will tell you with brutal clarity which one she truly is. The first type, the builder, values emotional security. She sees distance not as rejection, but as feedback. After her anger fades, she starts to reflect. She replays moments in her mind, wondering if she's pushed you too far, if she's stopped appreciating your effort. This kind of woman is rare, but she's the one capable of reconciliation, because she wants to fix, not replace. Then there's the second type, the consumer. She doesn't build relationships, she uses them for emotional fuel. When you withdraw, she doesn't introspect, she redirects. Instead of missing you, she seeks new attention to fill the void you've left. You'll notice her posting thirst traps on Instagram, suddenly reconnecting with male friends, or talking about how happy and free she feels. You're watching a dopamine addict going through withdrawal and looking for her next hit. I learned this the hard way. I once dated a woman who on the surface had everything: intelligence, charm, success, but I was always the one initiating, always the one chasing. So one day, I decided to pull back, not as a game, but as an experiment. The first week, she didn't notice. The second week, she started posting more selfies, more living my best life captions. By week 3, I heard from a mutual friend that she'd been texting her ex. That was my wake-up call. My absence didn't make her miss me. It made her search for a replacement. And that's when I realized something few men ever admit. You can't increase your value to someone who doesn't value you in the first place. Some people are wired for novelty, not depth. They don't bond, they sample. Modern culture and social media have amplified this, conditioning people, especially women, to crave attention like oxygen. If validation is her drug, your distance doesn't make her sober. It makes her desperate for another dealer. But when you're dealing with a woman of substance, one capable of true emotional connection, your absence triggers something entirely different. Once the anger subsides, she enters what I call the transition phase. It's quiet, introspective, and filled with uncertainty. She's no longer furious, but she's not reaching out yet either. She's observing the silence, feeling the absence, questioning her own behavior. During this period, she'll start to remember the good times, the laughter, the safety, the subtle ways you made her life better. But pride keeps her from acting. It's not that she doesn't want to reach out, she just doesn't want to lose face. And that tension between pride and longing is exactly what begins to rebuild the attraction. This stage is agony for both of you. For her, it's emotional turbulence. For you, it's psychological torture. Every instinct screams to break the silence, to check on her, to fix it. But doing so resets the entire process back to zero. The transition phase is like the healing period after surgery. It's uncomfortable, but necessary for recovery. Most men fail here because they mistake silence for failure. They think, she's not calling, so it's over. But silence is often the first sign that the emotional equilibrium is resetting. You're not punishing her, you're giving her the space to feel your absence. And for a woman capable of genuine love, that absence becomes a mirror reflecting her own shortcomings. But here's the twist. Not every woman has the emotional maturity to stay in that discomfort. The ones addicted to validation will escape it immediately, usually by seeking someone new to fill the emotional void. The ones built for connection will endure it, process it, and begin the slow path toward reconnection. That's why knowing which type of woman you're with is everything. You can't apply the same strategy to two completely different psychological blueprints. For one, distance is medicine. For the other, it's an invitation to cheat. And if you're with the wrong type, it's not your job to cure her. It's your job to recognize the pattern and walk away with your dignity intact. Because the truth is, you can't fix someone whose sense of worth depends on being desired by everyone. Still, for the right kind of woman, this distance sets off a transformation that's almost biological. After weeks of emotional recalibration, she begins to feel something she hasn't felt in a long time: respect. And that respect quietly evolves into longing. The silence starts to weigh on her. The space begins to ache. And that's when you'll start noticing the subtle signs of re-engagement: small gestures, a random message, a harmless meme, a "hey, just thinking about you." They seem innocent, but they're not. They're the first breadcrumbs of what's coming next, the third phase. And this is the one that destroys almost every man who makes it this far. Because the next phase isn't about distance, it's about how you handle her attempts to close it. This is the stage that feels deceptively hopeful. After weeks of silence, she starts leaving small signs of life, tiny breadcrumbs that seem harmless but carry enormous meaning. A text about something trivial, a meme she knows will make you laugh, a random message asking for advice she doesn't really need. It's subtle, it's calculated, and it's the third phase: reproach and reconnection. At this point, she's not ready to reconcile, not yet. She's testing the waters, seeing if the version of you she remembers still exists. These gestures are her emotional radar, pinging the air to see if you'll respond like the old you, eager, grateful, desperate for her attention. And that's where most men self-destruct. After weeks of withdrawal, they see these breadcrumbs and jump like starving animals. They text back immediately, shower her with warmth, and try to fast forward to the emotional comfort they've been missing. In doing so, they destroy the mystery and rebuild the very dynamic that suffocated attraction in the first place. You have to understand, her reaching out is not the finish line, it's the next test. She needs to see whether your distance was real or just a tantrum. Because if it was genuine, your energy will be calm, grounded, consistent. If it was performative, she'll sense it instantly. And once she knows the old version of you is still waiting behind the curtain, the experiment ends. The polarity dies. This is also when phase 4 begins, the most volatile part of the process: provocation. She will now test you consciously or unconsciously to measure how much you've actually changed. Some of her provocations will look positive. She'll flirt more, be extra affectionate, initiate intimacy. Others will be subtle attacks, comments designed to make you jealous, small emotional jabs to see if you'll lose control. She's not being cruel, she's verifying. She wants to know if your composure is permanent or conditional. I watched a close friend navigate this phase perfectly. Married for 10 years, his relationship had drifted into emotional autopilot. No excitement, no warmth, just routine. So he quietly started applying distance. No grand declarations, no cold shoulders, just a gradual shift in focus back to himself. First month, pure chaos. She accused him of cheating, of not caring, even threatened to leave. He stayed calm, said he needed space to refocus, and wasn't angry. By the second month, she softened. She started making his favorite meals again, casually touching him more, dressing differently. But mixed in were provocations. Comments about how other men found her attractive, subtle suggestions about maybe trying an open relationship. He didn't bite, he didn't get jealous or overreact. He just smiled, listened, and stayed centered. By the third month, something extraordinary happened. She began to pursue him, texting first, planning dates, wanting to be intimate again, not out of obligation, but genuine desire. The polarity had reversed. The man who'd been chasing for years was now being chased. But here's the lesson that most men miss. Distance only works when it's imperceptible. It's not a loud withdrawal. It's quiet, measured, and almost invisible. Like medicine, too small a dose does nothing. Too large kills the patient. You don't announce your space. You simply create it through behavior. You become less available, less predictable, less easily influenced. You make time for yourself again. Friends, hobbies, goals. You stop jumping at every vibration of your phone. The timing of this shift is everything. If you try to distance yourself during a major fight, you'll look petty or manipulative. That's like performing heart surgery during an earthquake. It never ends well. The best time is when things are calm but stale. When you sense the respect slipping, but before resentment sets in. Because when you withdraw after she's already emotionally checked out, she won't feel your absence as loss. She'll feel it as relief. The key is to introduce distance before she's detached. That's when it activates attraction instead of apathy. And here's the scientific truth few men understand. The human brain assigns value based on scarcity. When something, or someone, is constantly available, it becomes background noise, like oxygen, vital but unnoticed. But the moment that availability disappears, the brain flags it as valuable again. This is pure evolutionary psychology. Desire requires distance. Modern men have been taught that constant presence equals love, that devotion means availability on demand. But love without absence turns into dependency, and dependency breeds resentment. It's not your job to be her emotional crutch. It's your job to be a man with a center of gravity so strong she's drawn into your orbit, not the other way around. I once spoke to an older man, married for 45 years, still deeply in love with his wife. When I asked him his secret, he smiled and said, "Son, I never let her believe she owned me. She always knew I chose her, but I never made her think she possessed me." He maintained friendships she wasn't part of, hobbies she didn't share, a private world that remained entirely his. And that, he told me, was what kept the spark alive. Not fear, not control, but freedom. Because when two people have no boundaries, attraction dies under the weight of certainty. And that lesson leads to the final phase, the part every man must understand if he ever wants to keep respect alive for decades. It's no longer about tactics or timing, it's about identity, about becoming the kind of man whose presence is a privilege, not an expectation. An older man's wisdom stuck with me for years. Never let her feel like she completely has me. It sounded strange at first, almost selfish, until I realized it was the essence of what makes attraction endure. Love cannot breathe in ownership. It thrives only in freedom. What he practiced wasn't manipulation, it was strategic independence, a lifelong awareness that mystery sustains desire. See, what most men call love is often just attachment. They mistake being constantly available for being loyal. They think devotion means never saying no, never having a private life, never prioritizing themselves. And then they wonder why passion dies and respect disappears. Strategic distance is the antidote. It reminds both partners that love is a choice, not a cage. But here's the truth most men can't stomach. This kind of discipline hurts. It takes more strength to stay calm through a storm than it does to avoid one. Every instinct in you will scream to fix things, to restore peace, to end her discomfort. But that discomfort is part of the cure. It's like resetting a broken bone. It has to hurt before it heals. I've seen countless men overcorrect. They confuse independence with indifference, thinking the goal is to act cold, distant, and untouchable. But total detachment doesn't create attraction. It breeds resentment. You don't need to disappear. You need to rebalance. The goal isn't to make her suffer. It's to reintroduce polarity, to remind her that your attention has weight because it's no longer free. When she begins to reach out again, that's when most men relapse. One kind gesture, one night of intimacy, one nostalgic smile, and suddenly, all that emotional distance evaporates. They rush back in, eager to lock the harmony down again. But doing that is like a recovering addict celebrating his sobriety with a drink. All progress erased. The key in this phase is warm uncertainty. You're kind, but not eager. You're present when together, but unavailable when apart. You're grounded, not needy. Connected, not dependent. This delicate balance creates what psychologists call dynamic tension. It's the emotional current that keeps relationships alive. She doesn't quite know where she stands. Not because you're manipulating her, but because you've stopped broadcasting your every thought and feeling. There's space again. There's curiosity again. That's what fuels attraction. The awareness that you could leave, but choose to stay. Now, not every relationship can be saved this way. Some are already hollow, too much resentment, too little respect. When the bond has decayed beyond repair, distance doesn't revive it. It exposes its corpse. I've worked with men who spent years rebuilding themselves after emotional neglect or betrayal. 2 years of quiet separation, not to punish their wives, but to rediscover who they were before they became caretakers of someone else's moods. Those men focused on themselves, physically, mentally, financially, spiritually. Some of their wives eventually came back, not because of guilt, but because the man they fell for had returned. Others didn't, and that was fine, because the distance had already done its real job. It rebuilt the man. That's the paradox no one tells you. Distancing isn't about her. It's about you. It's the process of remembering the parts of yourself you abandoned in the name of keeping someone else happy. When you stop revolving around her emotions, you rediscover your own. You start making decisions that don't require permission. You begin to feel calm, grounded, centered. You become, once again, the kind of man she was drawn to in the first place, the man with a purpose beyond her. I went through this myself once. I had become so entangled in a relationship that I no longer knew where I ended and she began. My world revolved around her schedule, her opinions, her moods. When I finally pulled back, it was disorienting, even painful. But as the weeks passed, something shifted. I began enjoying my solitude. I rediscovered old passions. I realized I didn't need constant affirmation to feel whole. And the irony? The moment I stopped needing her validation, she started craving mine. That's the final paradox of this entire process. The less you need her to miss you, the more she will. Because genuine independence can't be faked. When you truly detach from the outcome, when your life becomes full with or without her, that's when the polarity returns naturally. She senses that your attention is once again earned, not owed. It's tempting to think of these phases, anger, transition, reproach, provocation, pursuit, as a roadmap for fixing her. But in reality, they're a roadmap for fixing you. Every stage tests your resolve, your emotional control, your willingness to stay grounded. The real transformation isn't in her reaction, it's in your restraint. And yes, sometimes she'll never come back. Sometimes distance doesn't reignite attraction, it reveals indifference. But that's still a victory, because it frees you from illusions. You can't lose what was never truly yours. What distance ultimately teaches you is self-sufficiency. The ability to stand alone without resentment, without desperation, without fear. Whether it rekindles your marriage or ends it, you come out the other side stronger, clearer, more complete. That's the true purpose of distance, not manipulation, not revenge, but evolution. It either resets the relationship or releases you from it. Either way, you win, because you stop living like an emotional servant and start living like a man with his own center of gravity. So if you're listening to this wondering whether to take that step, remember this: the goal isn't to make her miss you. The goal is to become someone worth missing.